My name's Vicky Lee. I'm a licensing trainer. I work very closely with TD SYNNEX, and they've been asked me to come along today and to go through a licensing session around Microsoft 365 licensing. I'm based in the UK. You may or may not be able to tell that from my accent. And I know that you guys are probably based all around Europe. So it is lovely as ever to be sort of chatting to you all. Now, as Michael did say, if you've got any questions for me, do just pop them into the Q&A window. I will keep an eye on that as I go through the session, and I will sort of either answer questions as we go along or at the end of the session, or if you've got any questions that are sort of a bit larger, we can obviously potentially look at following up after the session as well. I am also more than happy to share a PDF copy of the slides that I'm going through. So I'll share those with Michael. He can pass them on to you guys. But what you will find is that as we go through the session today, I will point you in the direction of a lot of really useful resources. So the places that I tend to go to when I want to look things up and make sure that I'm up to date with everything that's going on from a licensing point of view, because slides are only ever accurate to the day that they were sort of last updated. I've been busy updating these slides ready for this session today, whereas the resources that I will point you in the direction of will always be kept up to date. So the aim of this session today, obviously we're talking around Microsoft 365 and the modern workplace, and we're looking at the licensing side of things. So we are most definitely sort of focusing on licensing. And I am going to kind of start from the beginning and work my way through. So if you have some knowledge already, it may be a case of just bearing with the bits that you do know, and obviously, taking on board the bits that you don't know and learning those. We won't be going through absolutely everything with regards to all of the sort of modern work technologies, because that would take far longer than the hour we have sort of scheduled, and you'd probably have enough of it by the time we got too far into it. But you can see what I'm planning on looking at is what makes up Microsoft 365, the different offerings that are available with Microsoft 365 that are most definitely targeting different sort of types of customer, different sizes of customer, different users within an organization. And we're going to have a look at all of the different plans that are available. But as we go through, we are going to look at the different licensing options that are out there. So to help with that decision of what do I license with, where am I going to start with my licensing? Where might I want to go? And look at how customers can evolve their licensing and can add more and more sort of components. So we'll start with the basics, and then, as I say, we'll build up on top of that, looking at, as I say, some of the resources that are out there, again, to help you choose that sort of right solution for the different users within your organization. We've got some other useful licensing bits of information, and as I say, I will finish off with all those useful resources that I work with. So let us start with our little sort of overview of Microsoft 365. And what we've got to think about here is obviously what it is and why do we actually have it. Microsoft 365 isn't a product in its own right. It is a collection of products that have been pulled together. And Microsoft 365 obviously came into existence because of how we work nowadays. And if you think about how we work nowadays, it tends to be that many of us will work with multiple devices. So we'll have more than one computer. I've actually got two in front of me at the moment that I'm using just to help me with this running this presentation. So we work multiple devices in multiple locations. That could be we're in the office, it could be we're at home, we could be at a customer site, wherever it is. And we need to ensure that wherever we are, whatever device that we are actually working with, we can do our job. We can securely access all of the applications and all of the content that we need to work with. And the companies that we work for obviously need to ensure that the devices that we're using are secure and managed, so that we are protecting that corporate environment, we're protecting the corporate data. And this is obviously where Microsoft 365 comes in. It's really partnering up two things. It's partnering up user productivity and the sort of security and management aspect. So it pulls together a whole collection of cloud services. You know, we've got the Microsoft 365 applications, you know, what we used to refer to as Office, but obviously Office in the cloud. But we've got our Microsoft 365 applications, cloud services bringing in the user productivity piece. And as I say, this sort of device management and security features coming in, allowing organizations to ensure that everything we're working with is as secure and managed as it needs to be. And from a licensing point of view, you could say that really very simply, Microsoft 365 and all the components it consists of are licensed with user subscription licenses, or USLs. So there is a monthly cost for the user for the service or collection of services that they are working with. And as you'll know, with our user subscription licenses, you know, you're paying that monthly cost, but there's, depending upon how you buy your licenses, different options on how you pay. So it could be that you are paying monthly every month for your licenses, or it could be that you're paying on an annual basis, and just each year you're just paying for the next year's worth of licenses against that monthly fee. Now, when we look at Microsoft 365, it does consist of an awful lot of different components out there. And what Microsoft have done is they've grouped these components together into plans. And there are a whole host of different plans out there to suit, as I said, the different types of organizations. So be it commercial companies, be it academic or public sector organizations, you know, different sizes. There's plans for small and large companies. And we even go down to the different types of user within an organization, and there's different offerings for the different users. But when we look at Microsoft 365, one thing that is familiar across all of the plans is the general components they consist of. There will always be some form of apps, and we're thinking here about the Microsoft 365 apps, be it, you know, sort of Word, Excel, and so on. It might be that you have access to the full apps that are installed locally on your computer. It might be that you have browser-based access into the apps and you can look at them through your browser, but there will always be some level of access to the apps. On the same note, you will always have some of the Office 365 services. And here we're thinking about things like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so on. And again, the level of access you get is going to vary depending upon the plan that you're working with. You may well have access to Windows 11, and again, you may well have access to some of the security and management tools. And again, the different plans will have different combinations of all of these licenses. And that's something that obviously I'm planning on talking about in this session so that we can see the differences between all of them. So this is by no means a full list of all of the plans that are available. I do hasten to add, I am going to dive into them, and I am going to show you a couple of really useful resources where you can get extreme detail on what is inside of each plan, so that when someone says, does this have, you know, so and so, you can look and go yes or no, it doesn't have it. So as I say, there are some good resources out there, but this link on the slide is a good place to go to if you want to see just a bit of an overview across what's in all of the different Microsoft 365 plans. Now, there is one thing I do need to talk about, and to just touch on it. This is something that happened this month at the beginning of October with regards to Microsoft 365 and Teams. Now, you may be, if you're familiar with Microsoft 365, you may know that a lot of the plans obviously have Teams sitting inside of them. Now, what has happened is the European Commission have opened a formal investigation all about Microsoft's bundling of Teams into the Microsoft 365 and the Office 365 suites. So they've been looking at whether Microsoft are allowed to do that, sort of, you know, including Teams in their suites or not. So one thing to be aware of is that Microsoft have made some changes to alleviate these concerns. And these changes do affect customers in the European Economic Area, so the EEA, and Switzerland. So it may well be, and I'm assuming that everyone attending is sitting in one of those areas. If you're not, then you can kind of ignore me for the moment. If you are, it is something you need to bear in mind. Now, what we have with Microsoft 365 is obviously a range of different plans. And if you look at my table on the left-hand side, you can see a list of the different plans that have always traditionally had Teams sitting inside of them. So we can see the general sort of E1, E3, E5, and so on. Now, what Microsoft have done is they have created new versions of these plans in the European Economic Area in Switzerland. And these are versions of the plans that do not include Teams. Now, you're going to have what we call existing customers who have purchased the original SKUs. Customers who have purchased Office 365, Microsoft 365 prior to the 1st of October will have Teams included in that. Now, for those particular customers, nothing needs to change if they don't want it to. If they are happy carrying on working with Teams and having Teams as part of their plan, then existing customers are going to be allowed to carry on renewing original SKUs. If, however, though, you have an existing customer that isn't happy with the fact they've had to pay for Teams, maybe they're not using it, maybe they're using another tool, Zoom or whatever it might be, and they're saying, look, I'm paying for Teams, but I don't want to use this. When they come to renewal of their original SKUs that include Teams, they will be able to renew over to these new SKUs that you will see if you were to look at your price list all have EEA without Teams written on them. They cost less than the SKUs that have Teams included inside of them because obviously they haven't got Teams as part of the sort of the license set. So existing customers can either carry on renewing their original SKUs and carry on business as usual, or if they don't want Teams, they can move over to the without Teams SKUs at renewal. But what you will find is any new customers, so we're talking about brand new sort of customers subscribing to Office 365 or Microsoft 365 for the first time, they are not going to be able to buy the SKUs that have Teams sitting inside of them. So when they buy now Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 or Office 365 E3 or E5, they will be buying the without Teams SKUs. If they want Teams as well, they purchase Teams as a standalone SKU on top of that. So they will have to have two things that they purchase. However, you'll see the F plans that we are going to talk about, you can still buy with or without Teams, and the business plans that I will also talk about, again, you can buy with or without Teams. There is a very useful FAQ that actually has just been updated. So it's been updated since I took my screenshot of it. It was updated about a week or so ago. I have put a link to it on the slide, but if you need to know more about this, then do check that out. Now, I've probably spent a bit too long talking about this. I needed to get it out up front because as I go through all of my slides, pretty much all of my slides are going to assume that Teams is part of what we're talking about. So you're going to see lots of ticks with Teams included in things. Just bear in mind that's either customers are working with the original SKUs that have Teams as part of them, or maybe they've bought the without SKUs, but they want Teams, so they've also got Teams as well. They've purchased that separately. If you've got customers that haven't got Teams at all, then just ignore all the Teams bits, as far as thinking about those individual customers. It's really hard to know what to do with your slides. Do you include it, not include it? Yeah, I couldn't make my mind up on that one, to be honest with you. Okay, anyway, hopefully that makes sense, something that hopefully you were vaguely aware of before today, but let's dive into the components. So as I say, Microsoft 365 in its own right isn't actually a product, it is effectively a suite consisting of lots of different components. And when we think of what's inside Microsoft 365, we have got Office 365, we've got Windows, we've got the security and the management tools. And when we think about Office 365, what we're really thinking about here are the Microsoft 365 applications, so Word, Excel, and so on, all of those different apps, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Teams. So obviously with or without Teams, depending upon what the customer has actually purchased. So this is all about user productivity, and you'll know as end users, you'll be working with some of these tools, and they're all there to help you with your work and make sure that you can get your work done. Now, all of these elements can be licensed individually. It's absolutely possible to just buy the Microsoft 365 applications, to just buy Teams, to just buy Exchange Online. So remember, there's always flexibility here that as an organization, as a customer, you can choose what individual elements that you want to license. But again, we do have Office 365 plans. And what we'll find as we go through the plans is they're always increasing in functionality. So if we took E1, for instance, E1 doesn't have the full desktop apps, but it has mobile and browser-based access into the Office applications. But you do have access to some Exchange Online, some SharePoint Online, potentially Teams if you've bought Teams and so on. But you haven't got all the top-end analytics, security and compliance tools. If we look at an E3 versus an E1, it brings in the desktop client apps. And what you've got to remember with the client apps as well is that you've got the rights to install on multiple devices. So you have what we call 5+5+5 installs. So that's 5 PCs that I can install the Office apps onto, 5 tablets and 5 smartphones for that licensed user to work with. So can I just say that as a user, I would no way want 5 smartphones. I think that would be hideous to have that many phones. I've got 1, 2 potentially at tops I could cope with, but the whole point of the multiple installs is that you don't run out of installs. You should be able to work with the technology on all of the devices that you need. E3 brings in a bit more Exchange, a bit more SharePoint and so on. And then E5 builds on E3, adding in some of the analytics, security, compliance tools that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail again as we carry on through this session. So when we think about Office 365, we are thinking user productivity here, and it's the Office apps and it's all of those Exchange, SharePoint, Teams tools and things. Another element of Microsoft 365 is Windows 11. And again, Windows 11 can be licensed individually. As we know, with all of these things, they can be bought individually or as part of the suite. And when we think about Windows 11, it is worth remembering that there are different licensing models here. We have our sort of on-premises as such licensing model, which is the device licensing of Windows 11, where you would buy a license for every device that has got Windows running on it. But we know that if we've got users working with multiple devices, as we may well be doing, it can be better to license on a user basis. So you license the user for Windows 11, they can then work with Windows 11 on all of the devices that they need to work with. And when you license Windows 11 on a user basis, it comes in 2 flavors. It comes in an E3 and an E5 flavor. And what we'll find is the main difference between E3 and E5 is that E5 has an extra security feature in it called Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, which again, I will talk about in a little more detail shortly. But as I say, it's really just bringing in a higher level of security features when you go up from the E3 to the E5 with Windows. Now, with Windows, when you license Windows, there are a few things you need to appreciate with licensing for Windows. One is that it is an upgrade license. And being an upgrade license, it does mean that there must be an underlying license to upgrade from. And all Windows licenses need what we call a qualifying operating system. Now, if you haven't come across the product terms before or had training from me before, you'll know if you've been trained by me in the past that I am obsessed with the product terms site. But this is the site that gives us all of the sort of the rules behind licensing. So it's a legally binding site. It details everything you need to know about the individual licensing of products. And it's one of the first places that I will go to check on licensing facts if someone asks me a question. And here I've got a snippet from the product terms site for Windows 11 telling me that for every Windows 11 per user license I have bought, that the user that I have licensed must be the primary user of at least one device with a qualifying operating system. A primary user is the person who uses the device for over 50% of the time in a 90-day period. So it's really saying it's the main user of that device. And that device that they are the primary user of must be their main work device, so the device they use the bulk of the time. It also says with a device license that the device must have a qualifying operating system on it, and it must be installed on that device. So what makes a qualifying operating system? Well, the product terms document again shows me, and I've just taken a snippet of it here. So this table is bigger, and be aware of that. But it's showing me that my qualifying operating system, if it's Windows 10 or 11, must at least be a Pro. So what we're saying really is we must at least have a copy of Windows 11 Pro on the computer, installed, should I say, on the computer to upgrade from. Generally, that's your OEM license that you've bought when you've bought your new computer. It will have come with a copy of Windows on it. As long as that's Pro or above, for commercial customers, that would be good enough as a qualifying operating system. However, we're focusing on Microsoft 365 today, and there is an extra little bit in the product terms again that there's the use rights for the Windows element of Microsoft 365 is modified. So the rules are slightly different when you buy Windows as part of Microsoft 365 as opposed to buying it standalone. Saying as a licensed user, so if it's a user license, I do not actually need to be the primary user of any device, but any device that I run Windows on locally, again, must have a qualifying operating system. So the key thing is, it's quite important. You're installing Windows locally on a device, you need a qualifying operating system on that device to upgrade from. So product terms, I've put a link to it on the slide again, but a really key place, obviously, just to keep an eye on the rules and to see how the rules vary depending upon what license you've actually purchased. So that would be my Windows 11 element. Then the last sort of main element that makes up Microsoft 365 is EMS, Enterprise Mobility and Security. And again, really with this, we're coming back to the fact that as a user, we are working on multiple devices in multiple locations. We need to access all of our data, all of our apps securely to be able to do our work. And obviously, again, we need to empower the users with the productivity tools to do that through Office 365, things like Windows 11, but we need to bring in the ability to secure and manage the devices that we're working on. And this is what Enterprise Mobility and Security does. It brings in a whole range of tools that allow us to manage the devices, manage the apps we're working with, control who can access data and make sure that we haven't got the wrong people accessing data and doing things that they shouldn't be. So when we look at EMS, there are a number of tools sitting inside of it. Again, there's an E3 and an E5 version, as we have with all of these licenses. And you can see with EMS E3 that we have a Microsoft Entra ID Plan 1. Okay, Entra ID used to be Azure Active Directory. It has recently been renamed. I'm hoping I found all my Azure ADs through my slides and changed them. I did do my best to do that. But a rebrand there. For Azure AD. So Entra ID Plan 1, we've got Azure Information Protection, Premium Plan 1, we've got Intune. And then you can see that E5 really builds on that, bringing in the Plan 2s of things like Entra ID and Information Protection, but also adding in Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Identity as well. And again, I am going to talk about some of these in a little bit more detail as we carry on through the session today. Again, I've put a link in here and I've got some other really useful resources so that if you do need to know a bit more about the in-depth as to what these different tools do, I can point you in the direction of the resources to find that out. So we look at Microsoft 365 then. We know we've got Microsoft 365 apps, we've got the Office 365 services, so things like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Teams. We've got Windows 11, we've got security and management tools in the form of EMS. And we have the E-plans, we have E3 and E5. And when we think about those E-plans, they're aimed at the sort of the information worker, that's you and me, that's, you know, people who are spending a lot of their working life sitting on a computer and they need the rich productivity tools. They need the good security and management tools, you know, to be able to do their work. So we have our enterprise plans, and I would say the E-plans, the enterprise plans, can really target any size of organization. So it could be very small companies. You know, for instance, if I take myself, I am a one-person organization. I'm a freelancer. I get hired by different people to do work. Yet I have an E-plan because I need all of the tools that E3 gives me. So I have that license there because I need to work with the richer sort of productivity features to be able to do my work. All the way up to obviously very large organisations, any size company can happily work with an E-plan. But there are other plans out there to suit, as I say, sort of maybe more specialist offerings. So let's take the frontline workforce. When you look at an organisation, organisations are going to have lots of different types of staff in them. They'll have their information workers, the yous and me's of the world who are using a computer probably for far too much of their working life. They also have people like the frontline workforce. And when we think about our frontline workers, what we're thinking about here are people whose main job is not on a computer. So they're going to spend the bulk of their time doing something else. They're not going to be on the computer. So you can see some examples here, flight crew, nurses, doctors, people who work in hospitality. Their main job is doing something else, but they will need maybe every day to go onto the computer just to check their emails, maybe to do a Teams chat, maybe to consume documents that are held on SharePoint. They will need to spend some of their working life on a computer, probably on a shared computer, shared with their other frontline workers, but they will need some of the tools. So we have F plans available. We've got Microsoft 365 F1 and F3. And when we look at these, what they do is they pull in, obviously, a combination of the different Microsoft 365 elements, but it's been toned down to suit the frontline worker. So look at F1, we've got some of the EMS tools, so some of the security and management tools, because quite frankly, the device that your frontline worker is working on is as important to secure and manage as any other device in your organization. It hasn't got a Windows license associated with it. Maybe because it's a shared device, you might just have a device license for Windows sitting on that device. It's got some other access though. So you have got some Teams access sitting in there. You've got Microsoft 365 for the web, so you can look at documents, but read only. So you're consuming, you get a bit of OneDrive storage and so on, but you don't have that many of the productivity features in F1. However, when we go across to F3, you can see from my chart, it builds up. I've got a whole host more of my user productivity features. I've also got Windows licensing inside of there as well. There is also an Office 365 F3, which doesn't have really any, hasn't got Windows, and it doesn't really have any of the EMS tools apart from the sign-in sort of tools there. Office 365 F3 nowadays only available through CSP as well. But, there is that offering. So there's different F plan, frontline worker plans out there for your frontline workers. However, there are rules about who can have a frontline worker license. And again, I've got a snippet from the product terms here. So I'm not lying when I tell you that I use the product terms a lot, telling me that I can only assign a frontline worker device to a user who satisfies one or more of the following conditions. So either their primary work device is a single screen smaller than 10.9 inches. That's the diagonal screen size. So 10.9 inches, less than that, they could have a frontline worker license. Or, and that is an or because they need to satisfy one or more of the conditions, they share their primary work device with other frontline worker licensed users during or across shifts. And if they're sharing the devices, they can be any screen size on those devices. And then it goes on to tell me that any other software obviously must be licensed properly and so on. And it tells me what the qualifying licenses are and things. So it's quite important to appreciate with your frontline worker that you do have to be sort of eligible for that license. You have got to meet at least one of those conditions to be able to be licensed with that. If you can't meet one of those conditions, then the F plan is not the plan for you, and you potentially would be licensed with an E plan instead. So that's our frontline workers. Just checking, don't see any questions at the moment. Obviously, if you do have questions, do pop them into the Q&A window. But the other plan, just to have a look at before we go into a bit more detail around some of these things, are the business plans. Now, the business plans all have the word business written inside of them. And these are plans that have been created for the small to medium sized business. So Microsoft have said, look, we've got a lot of small business sort of customers. They might not need the full rich functionality of an e-plan. They could choose to license with a business plan. Business plans are technically limited at up to 300 users. So when you license a business plan, you can only have up to 300 of that particular business plan. So if you have 301 users and you want them all licensed with the same business plan, you would not be able to do that because, as I say, it is a technical limit. However, some small businesses, like I've said before, will want the e-plans anyway because they want the extra features, but these are offerings. And when you look at the business plans, there is a Microsoft 365 apps for business. So you can license just your users with the sort of effectively those Office apps with the 5+5+5 installs that I talked about before. Or you can build up and you can bring in security and management features and then potentially Windows as well as you move up through Business Basic, Business Standard and Business Premium. And you can see with Business Premium, I mean, that's the only one that brings in Windows into the licensing, brings in the security and management, the compliance tools and things. So Business Premium is quite a well-loaded plan that is out there. But they are targeting the small to medium sized customer, and as they are technically limited at up to 300 users per plan. Now, these slides, I've got them in my presentation. They're not actually my favourite slides at all because they show nicely that as you go up through the plans, you get an increase in the features. But I always find they don't really give enough detail about what is included in all of the different plans. And this is why Microsoft have got these documents that are just available on the Microsoft 365 website, but I have put a link into this on my slide. There's different versions of this document. So this is the business plan. We'll see there's an enterprise plan one. If you have academic customers, there are A plans for the academic customers. There's an academic equivalent of this as well, but shows you in a lot of detail. So this document is a 7-page document in total, and I'm just showing you a screenshot of the first page. But it goes into an awful lot of detail about what is included in each of these plans. And these documents are always kept up to date. So if you always open them from the website, you will find that you're always working with the latest version of this particular document. But if you want to see precisely what is included in each of the plans down to a very granular level, this is where I would look. Now, with the change with Teams that has happened this month, there are 2 versions of this document. So I've got here the version for businesses in the European Economic Agreement countries and in Switzerland. You can see it shows us the difference between the with and without sort of Teams licenses in there, so that you can see this impact of removing Teams, what is happening there. There are versions for the rest of the world out there that are effectively the old version of this document that don't have the no Teams SKUs sitting inside of them. So please do make sure, depending upon where you are actually located, that you have got the correct version of this document. It's quite obvious when you look online which version you are actually choosing. But the links I've put on the slide will take you to the EEA documents. Right, so we've had a look then, an overview of the different plans, and we know the different components making up Microsoft 365. What we have got to think about, though, is choosing the right solution. Because as I've already mentioned, different customers are going to have different requirements based on, the type of customer they are, how big they are, and even down to their users within the organization. It is going to be a case of working out what licenses the different users need, because you'll know what it's like. Not everyone in an organization needs exactly the same license. So it's quite important to choose the correct solution, to look at your users and almost profile out your users and say, well, these ones are frontline users. These ones use a bit of functionality. These ones use a lot of functionality. And to go ahead and make sure you license your users, sort of accordingly. Now, When it comes to sort of identifying what is included in each license, I've just shown you one document for the business plans that goes into a lot of detail about what's included in all of those licenses. And as I've said, I'll show you the enterprise version of that shortly. However, on the product terms site, there is a slightly simpler version. Now, in the product terms, you can see on the left-hand side of my slide, let me try and highlight it. There's a bit that says subscription license suites. And on the left-hand side, when you click on that, it takes you to this page. Again, it's a very long page. I've just got a little snippet of the top of it. But telling me what's included in the licenses. So with EMS, for instance, I can see what's in E3 and E5. With Microsoft 365, I can start to see the different licenses that are included, or the different components, should I say, that are included in the licenses. I quite like this site because sometimes I don't want the granular detail of those documents that we were just talking about. Sometimes I want more of an overview. And again, the product terms site is updated on a monthly basis, so it will always be up to date with the latest information. So this is a great site if you want to identify what is sitting inside of all the plans. But what you've got to think about here is if you're going to license your users, let's say with the E-plans, with the enterprise plans, you're going to have a choice of, do you want to license your users with E3 or do you want to license them with E5? Or do you want to be somewhere in the middle, a bit of E3 plus maybe with some extra features? Now, it's worth appreciating as we look at things like E3 and E5, what the key differences are between them. We know that E3 gives a good grounding. We've got our Microsoft 365 apps. We've got our user productivity servers in Exchange and SharePoint and Teams. We know we've got Windows. We know we've got some security and management tools. So we've got a nice, well-rounded sort of collection of tools when we're working with E3. E5 brings in extra features, and it brings in extra features across, broadly speaking, 4 key areas. So we've got extra security, compliance, calling and meetings features, and extra analytics features. And the way the licensing works is that it can be fine to maybe start a user with an E3 and then think, I want to just pop on some of the E5 components on top of that. Or maybe I'm really interested in security, or maybe I'm really interested in compliance and I want to put those features on. Maybe analytics is key to me. Maybe some of the Teams features, the calling and meetings features, maybe they're key to me. I want to put them on top. And what you've got to look at, I always think, is your start point. Do you need to add some extra bits on top? And when if you got to the point that you've added enough extra bits on top that you might as well just be licensed with E5, because from a cost point of view, E5 would be a better place to go. So I just want to sort of look at how we can build up so that you can really appreciate, when starting with an E3, what we can add on and what the options are for us to add on to work our way up potentially onto an E5. So we're going to start with the security features. And with the security features, we have a whole range of tools that fall under the Microsoft 365 Defender family. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single Defender tool. Do not worry. Again, that would take far too long and you probably wouldn't appreciate it. I will again show you a really useful resource as well, though, that I find very handy when it comes into wanting to know more about the individual elements. But with regards to the sort of Microsoft 365 E5 side of things, and that difference between E3 and E5, there's 4 Defender tools that we're interested in. So Defender for Endpoint, for Office 365, for Identity, and for Cloud Apps. And what you've got here is a whole host of tools. You can see here it's a unified pre and post breach enterprise defense suite. So to help you detect security risks and investigate any attacks onto your organization, prevent harmful activities. You want all of these things to happen automatically in the background. There is a really useful interactive guide that shows you how they all work together. So again, if it is something you're interested in, when we share the slides with you afterwards, you'll have the link in there to access that interactive guide. Now, these Defender tools are all available as individual licenses. So when we take Defender for Endpoint, we can see with the Endpoint, it's a client endpoint solution. So this is all about protecting, your users' devices. So again, detecting whether they've had any attacks and responding to and dealing with that. From a licensing point of view, available as a standalone user subscription license. So you can buy Defender for Endpoint on its own. And there's actually sort of two plans out there now, Plan 1 and Plan 2. And as you can imagine, Plan 1 is a subset of Plan 2. So if you don't want everything, you might go Plan 1. If you want everything, you'd go up to Plan 2. So that would be Defender for Endpoint. You've got Defender for Office 365. And when we look at Defender for Office 365, we can see here that this is safeguarding against malicious threats posed by email messages, links, that side of things. So obviously trying to stop the malware, the phishing, all of those elements. Now, Defender for Office 365 is an add-on license, again available as a Plan 1 or Plan 2, depending on what you need. But as an add-on license, you have to have an underlying license to add on to. So you can't just buy this standalone. It doesn't really work standalone. There's sort of almost no point. It is enhancing your underlying tools, your emails and everything like that. So you need to be licensed, and you can see the licenses on the slide here with at least, Microsoft 365, Office 365, Exchange, SharePoint, or OneDrive for Business. If you have one of those licenses, you would be able to purchase the Defender for Office 365 as an add-on on top of that. You then have Defender for Identity. Now, Defender for Identity is all about looking at users and knowing what is normal for a user. So it uses Active Directory to sort of work out how, as an individual user, you normally work. So for me, it would be that I normally have a couple of computers that I log in through, that I'm normally based in the UK, tend to work in certain hours, that sort of thing. And by knowing what's normal for a user, you can react to the abnormal. So if something weird happens and they're like, Vicky never does that, it's a bit weird for her, it's going to come back and go, hang on a minute, there's a potential issue here. Let's react to that. So again, Defender for Identity is available as a standalone license, so you can just purchase it in its own right. And again, it does have the ability to install an on-premises equivalent of it, known as the Advanced Threat Analytics. And then finally, on the Defender tools, we have the Defender for Cloud Apps. Now, this is a solution that looks across all sort of software as a service apps. So it's about looking across all the apps that as users we work with, controlling which apps you have access to. So if I'm a bit of a rogue app installer, there might be apps that my organization doesn't want me to work with because they don't meet the security requirements of your organization. It could block me, working with those apps. So what it's looking at is the apps we're working with and ensuring the data inside of the apps obviously is secure and managed. Again, available as a standalone license. And there is a product that is a sort of a subset of the Defender for Cloud Apps, which is the Office 365 Cloud App Security. And that is a sort of a smaller license, I suppose, technology that just works across Office 365 rather than across all of the apps that I might be working with. So there are a range of Defender tools that we can use. Let me bring them up on the slide. But let's look at how they fit with the Microsoft 365 elements, because I've said we might start, for instance, with E3. So we might have Windows 11 E3, we might have EMS E3, we might have Office 365 E3. And we might then want to add on some of these extra tools. So Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 is an E5 feature. So if I had E3 and then I purchase Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, that would be an E5 feature that I would be adding on top of there. The Defender for Cloud Apps and for Identity are a couple of the components that make up EMS E5. This slide, by the way, is going to build and it's going to get bigger and bigger and fuller and fuller. So, sort of bear with me on this slide. But they're EMS features. Defender for Office 365 Plan 2 is a Office 365 E5 feature. So what we have is these features, and I'm trying to show you, as I say, where they slot into the E5 story. You also have Office 365 Cloud App Security. Again, that's something that just sits in Office 365 E5. It's not available as a standalone license. You can't buy that separately. But if you have Office 365 E5, you would have Cloud App Security, the Office 365 one anyway, as part of that. So we have those Defender licenses. We also have some other security tools in the form of Entra ID, Azure Information Protection Premium, and Intune. Now, Entra ID, as I said, used to be Azure Active Directory. So remember, that's just a rebrand, a rename of that product. And when we think about that, that's all about single sign-on, isn't it? So it's managing our sign-on across multiple devices. When we sign in once, it gives us access to everything that we need to work with. Comes in two plans, Plan 1 or Plan 2, and again, is available as a standalone purchase. We've got Azure Information Protection, and that's all about protecting content. So you can classify content as, or as I've forgotten what the word is, private, confidential. Sorry, that's the word I'm after. You can mark a document as being confidential, and that means that it will just check if you sent a confidential document to someone, that the person who's opening that document is actually allowed to see it. They are the intended recipient of that document. So it's all about managing your content. Again, a Plan 1 and a Plan 2. You can buy Plan 1 as a standalone license, but you're going to see that Plan 2 actually isn't purchasable on its own. It's going to come as part of another license. And then you've got Intune, which is all about managing your devices. So we're working with multiple devices, like I've said. We need to make sure they're managed properly. We've got Intune to allow us to manage all of those devices. There's a standalone Plan 1 license for Intune. There is also a Plan 2 and an Intune suite, but they are both add-ons to Plan 1. So you have to have Plan 1 for Intune, then you can add on the extra components. So if we look at how these fit in our picture, all of those three elements, Entra ID Plan 2, Azure Information Protection Premium Plan 2, not available as a separate license, but it's part of EMS E5, as is Intune Plan 1. So if you looked at that EMS column, you'll be there going, all right, I could just buy EMS E3, I could buy E3 and add some extra elements, or if I bought EMS E5, I would have all of those bits. But Microsoft always wants to try and give flexibility. So imagine that I've started with E3. Let's say I've got Microsoft 365 E3. So I've got Windows E3, EMS E3, Office 365 E3. But I love all those security tools. And I'm thinking it's really important for me to have all these extra security features, but I do only want E3 plus the security features. I could buy them individually, or there is a security suite. So there is something called E5 Security, which groups together, you can see in my bubble, all of those security features into one license, an add-on license. So if I have Microsoft 365 E3 or Office 365 E3 and EMS E3, those two, I can add on the security features on top. So I can either go for a full-blown E5, as we'll see shortly, or I could purchase just the security E5 elements. It's very similar with compliance tools. There's a range of compliance tools. So we have information protection and governance, which is all about knowing your data, protecting your data, making sure you haven't got data loss, that you're only keeping the information that you should be keeping, deleting stuff you don't need. It is all about managing your data. That's available as an add-on license. You can see on the slide, I won't read them out, a list of the licenses you must have if you want to add on to that. Insider risk management, again, a compliance tool about sort of detecting malicious or inadvertent bad activities that have happened that have originated from inside the organization. So, you've got that user who's just lost their job and isn't very happy, might be doing something, not good. Would help detect that. That's an add-on license again. and e-discovery and audit, which is all about responding to legal matters, internal investigations, so about discovering the content you have inside of your organisation, again available as an add-on license to the licenses on my slide here. So all of these, again, are building on top of those E3 licenses. And if I returned back to my picture, you would see that those 3 compliance tools all fit in that Office 365 column. A couple of my boxes are deliberately wonky. If I just licensed Office 365 E5, I'd have all of those tools, but I wouldn't have everything with insider risk management and information protection and governance. I would have some of the tools, not all of them. That's why that box is a little bit wonky. Other things worth noting, information protection and governance includes Defender for Cloud Apps, so that's in there as well. And there is a compliance suite, an E5 compliance suite that again is an add-on license that I can add on to those E3 licenses. Now, when you look at this picture, you start to see how we can start at an E3 and we can build up components. We can go E5, we've got E3 plus security or compliance suites. As with everything, there will be a tip over point where if you add lots of individual components, the cost of them is enough that you might as well have gone for an E5. And if you obviously went for Microsoft 365 E5 as a whole, you would have all of these features that are on my slide, plus the E3 bits, plus a couple of extra components I'm about to talk about. So, you know, it is all about looking closely at what you want to work with and how you can build up. Now, there are just a couple of other components that make up E5. We have some Teams voice services. So, for instance, we have audio conferencing. Now, at the moment in this call, probably you are all just listening to me talking at you through your computer. However, with audio conferencing, what you have got is the ability to dial into a phone number and to listen to the voice element of the call over a phone rather than just through your computer. So if you didn't have headphones or speakers on your computer, yeah, you could dial in and listen on your phone. And you can either have a call that you would pay for, or if set up, there could be a toll-free sort of phone number. There's also the ability with audio conferencing to dial out from a meeting. So if one of you had contacted me and said, hey, Vicky, I can't get in, I can't hear the audio, here's my phone number, we could have dialed out to you with audio conferencing, again, to connect you to the audio element of the call. Now, audio conferencing is included in E5. So we've got that with my Office 365 E5. It is, however, actually now at a basic level, it is free for all of the E plans, but there's a $0 SKU you have to add. So if you've got E3 and you want audio conferencing, you just have to transact the $0 audio conferencing SKU. But you do need to transact it to have access to that service, whereas it is just automatically included in E5. There's then a whole host of extras you can pay for on top of that with the calling and things. You get a quantity of calls. If you need more than the quantity, then you buy extra. The same with Teams Phone. If you're used to working with Teams, you'll probably know that you can call colleagues. So Michael and I, obviously, we have a chat every now and again just to keep up to date with what's going on. We'll just have a chat over Teams. But if we use Teams Phone, we could then phone out, run through Teams, actually out through the sort of PBX, and we could phone out and have proper calls happening sort of through Teams rather than just a voice over IP call. So Teams Phone standard will allow you to connect out to the PBX and sort of separate phone systems, but have that happen through through Teams. And then calling plan allows you to purchase numbers of minutes. So I could use Teams to phone out to obviously lots of different phone numbers, and I could have included minutes. I could have included sort of local minutes. I could have included international minutes available. So there's different calling plans available as an extra that you can purchase that include the number of minutes that you need based on the plan you've purchased. And there are different plans for where you are regionally around the world and things, so it's worth appreciating that. So I'm hoping, just keeping an eye on the time, getting low on time, that you appreciate here that we've got the ability, as I say, to buy an E5 if we want, or an E3, but we could start with an E3 and we can layer on all the different components as individual components as part of the security or compliance suite, and as extras like the audio conferencing team phone. Power BI Pro Analytics, you can add that on top. Now, as I'm very aware that we're getting low on time, let me just pick out a couple of other, what I think are the really useful things. This site here, again, I've linked to on the slide, is a really useful site for going into detail on all the security and the compliance features that I've been talking about. So there's a lot of detail inside of there of what everything does, and it does have licensing information inside of there as well. So if you need to know more about that, this is a really handy site. As I say, there is an enterprise plan comparison document, 10 pages long. There's quite a lot of detail about what's included in all of the plans. So again, if you do like to see the fine detail about what's included in those plans, I would recommend downloading this particular document. Again, I've gone for the European Economic Area and Switzerland version of the document. So you have the with and without Teams licenses on display inside of there. So that's also a really handy resource. Just other useful resources just to quickly talk about, and then, as I say, I will release you as we will. I've hit the top of the hour. If you need to know more about licensing, sort of generally, you may or may not have come across Get Licensing Ready. There's a link to it on the site here. But this is a place that contains a whole host of different licensing modules around the different Microsoft licensing topics. Inside of each module, there's a video you can watch. There's a handout that you can download and read. And there's a short test. It does say exam. I think that's the wrong word. There's a short test just to check your knowledge. Great way if you're newer to licensing and you want to build up your knowledge at your own pace, a really good way of doing that. You've got the product terms site that I've mentioned far too many times today, which is a really handy place and is a place that I go to look up the absolute fine detail about the licensing for different products. And this is a legally binding site. Any customer who has bought a license has agreed to adhere to the terms of the product terms site. Just make sure you choose at the top the agreement they've bought through. So if it's CSP, you're going to choose Microsoft Customer Agreement from that drop-down list to get the CSP rules. You've got a licensing resources site, which is very good as well because it holds all the different documents that are out there around licensing. So there's a whole host of really useful licensing briefs and documents that you can access on that site. And there is Microsoft Learn. Again, a site I use a lot on here. It's got a whole host of technical documentation as well as sort of learning modules that you can follow through. But I like the technical documentation. I look in it a lot because it has a lot of licensing information in it as well. So that's another place that I spend a lot of my time in.